We don't do these things. We don't have to. So how does this apply to us? Well, let me remind you of a very important attribute of God's unchanging nature. Last week I quoted from the first part of Numbers 23, verse 9, but now let's read the whole verse. It says, God is not a man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. God does not change. He hasn't changed at all. If you insist on hearing it from the New Testament, let's look at Hebrews 13:8. It says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. If we don't worship God in the Old Testament ways, how are we to worship? God is truth. Therefore, what he says and commands is the only truth. He commanded that the saints worship him exactly as he designed. Because God is unchangeable and is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Therefore, he still expects and commands us to worship him exactly as he designed. Now, what has changed? God hasn't, but what has changed is the covenant requirements. So the minutia looks different, but the mode and the motive is still the same. Our hearts must be humble. We must come to Christ with humble hearts. Our spirits must be sanctified. They must be purified. They must be holy. Our bodies must be bowed down before him in reverence and in thankfulness. That's why we use the expression, bow your heads to pray, or get on your knees to pray. Some people I know even get down prostrate on the floor. They're facing in the carpet. That's not saying we must do that. But our heart and our spirit and our bodies must all be in agreement that Christ is worthy. And we must be humble as we come to him in worship. Not coming to him saying, well, I'm going to worship God the way I want to worship. I'm going to come to him as I think is best. There's a lot of different ways that we can worship God. There's a lot of different modes that we can do. You know, some worship God with hymns. Some worship God with contemporary music. Some worship God with hands raised. Others worship God flat on the floor. That's up to the people. That's up to the individual person. Christ, he makes us all different. But if we're not humble, if we're not sanctified, if we are not bowing before him in reverence, we're not truly worshiping. As I had mentioned last week, we tend to worship in experience, or worship our own emotional response to a message, or our own emotional response to a song service. That's what we worship. We don't worship the true God. If we did, we'd live for him each and every day. We cannot profane or diminish what God has called holy, or call holy what God has called profane. We cannot make our worship of God a spectacle. We cannot make our worship of God an entertaining experience. You may disagree with me, and I'm sorry if you do. But worship is worship. It should be you and God. And it's great. And we should worship God together. That brings us together, that a family that prays together stays together. We all have heard that before. A church family that prays together, that praises together, that worships together, they become stronger together. They become closer together. And we are commanded to gather together, to fellowship and to worship and to praise and to serve. Let's not forget that one. We're called to serve others, but our worship should be between us and God in these ways I just described: humble, sanctified, and reverent. And by the way, ignorance of what God desires is no excuse for poor worship. We may say, well, I don't really know what God wants. Well, it doesn't mean you keep doing things the wrong way. You just try to find the right way. Find what the Bible has to say.